Hey everybody, Eric Schweitzer here. Thank you so much for joining us for the penultimate episode in our Game of the Year series. Today we're joined by features lead Jade King, who's here to defend the honor of Resident Evil 4. Jade, how are you?
I'm good. Defending Resident Evil 4 every single day. That's what I get up to do. On the streets, in the sheets, I'm defending Resident Evil 4.
Then we picked the right gamer for this job. We have done 4 of our Game of the Year videos, and to be honest, Resi is probably the one we've talked about the least.
Not
because it doesn't deserve to win per se, but I guess that's what you're here for. So, first of all, I guess let's just start out talking about what you love about this remake.
Right. We all know how good Resi 4 is, right? One of the things I feared most when this remake was announced was the original is still kind of a masterpiece. It still plays pretty well. It's easily accessible. So why are they remaking this? And I think that scared me the most. But I've never been proven wrong so quickly by a remake than this game, because it's immediately familiar but innovative and influential and daring, which you wouldn't expect a remake like this to be. I mean, it hits all of the expected beats, but it goes so much further than that. And in a year where you've got like games like Alan Wake 2 making new strides in survival horror and almost being a contemporary to what Resident Evil 4 did all those years ago, it's quite an achievement for this to come along and then be like, oh, but I can still hang. This is Resident Evil 4 for an entirely new generation, and it's confident and it feels amazing to play, and it's also like endlessly replayable like the original was. Like I could play through that game right now and have fun and feel good about it. And I think that'll be the same 10 years on from now. Whether like this game keeps being ported and remastered like the original was, I doubt it. But
yeah, I mean, I had pretty much the same experience with this game. It's easy to get cynical about the remakes and remasters and the way this industry is just sort of repeating itself. But having said that, like, this game very easily justifies its own existence. It feels like it's still Resident Evil 4, but it's so much more. I was just constantly enthralled by it. I think I said in a video last week that it felt like somehow they managed to make a game that's nothing but set pieces.
No, that's totally true. It's a long game, at least relative to other Resi games. That this game can take you like 15 hours or more. And the fact that it keeps ratcheting things up and never gets boring and keeps surprising you, like the original did. But I think as a consequence, you didn't think the remake would, because it would retread all that old ground. But it subverts those expectations within like an aura of familiarity, and it just does that constantly.
Yeah. So I think that at least that is one thing we can say about RE4 that we can't say about any of the other Game of the Year nominees, is that, it is a product of remake culture, but it is like a guiding light. It's like
I think so.
Evidence that these remakes can be elevated, that they can be something that's important and meaningful and maybe even necessary. Like, if we're going to get endless remakes of old stuff we played 20 years ago, at least it can be something as remarkable as this.
Yeah, because one of the most fascinating things about Resi 4 is how it updates it to be contemporary, like especially with the characters, I think. Because I'm not saying that Resident Evil 4 didn't age badly, but the one thing about that game that did was probably the characters. Like some of the dialogue, some of the themes, some of like the subtle sexism that was in there with Ashley. Like I feel like the remake addresses all of that, but it doesn't like make it woke or whatever. It just like views it in a modern lens and makes it just as cheesy and just as impactful. And one of the coolest things it does, I think, especially since we've been getting these remakes since 2, it's building up that timeline, and we're getting to the point soon, probably, if they remake 5, where we'll be like meeting ourselves in the middle with like 7 and 8 and 4, which are all kind of aiming for the same tone in a different universe. And it will be one of the most exciting things about this remake is, as you said, it's something from 20 years ago, but it's also not. It's like it's a new game. It's a new thing that is probably laying the building blocks for things that won't be remakes anymore. And that's like a super weird and cool thing that we also saw FF7 remake do. Like, we're reimagining it, but we're also going to do some completely crazy shit along the way.
Right. And, you know, like, we're sitting here intellectualizing RE4, and that's like good.
It's a very highbrow, clever game.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, that's what we're here to do, but at the same time, like, it does a bit of a disservice to this game because this game is so rad. Yeah, and the experience of playing this game is how cool it is.
No, that's it. There was, when I was playing this, like, this is before it came out, and I was swapping clips with you and a few other people because we were just doing cool stuff all the time. I remember, I think someone threw a grenade at me, but I shot the grenade in midair and it fell and just killed all of them. Or like the parry system, like being able to just reflect like a throwing projectile that an enemy throws at you, and to feel like just the coolest person on earth. It's like, oh my god, it's so cool. Just you could just keep listing ridiculous and cool moments, and within the context of like a modern action game, you'd think, oh, that's unrealistic and silly. But Resident Evil grounds itself in that like ridiculous universe where it's allowed to be melodramatic and it's allowed to be cheesy, but it's also allowed to be serious in some ways. And it takes a deft hand to combine all those elements and make it work as well as Resi 4 does.
Yeah. You know, when we did Spider-Man 2 with Stacy, and when we did Mario Wonder with George, both of their arguments kind of hinged on the fun factor and like the joy of playing those games. And I don't want to sound like an edgelord, but nothing brought me more joy this year than like making people explode in Resident Evil 4 and like watching Leon's head get chainsawed off, and like that, when he does that was what really
it's so when he does that, I'm like, wall. I'm like, come on. But it works. He didn't, it's like orchestrated excess. That's also like a really wanky term, but you're spot on. Like, it's consistent in a way that I don't think Wonder and Spider-Man 2 are, but it's fun, but it's also like gritty and brutal and scary, and it's never outstayed its welcome, I don't think.
Right.
And I felt that with Spider-Man 2 and even Wonder to an extent. Like, Resident Evil 4 is a game that I could see myself going back to years and years down the line, but I don't see that, aside from like Baldur's Gate 3, with any of the other games that are nominated this year. It is that one constant where it's like, oh yeah, like Capcom has made another, they've made Resident Evil 4 into a masterpiece a second time, and I think that speaks to what they've created.
Yeah, and it's more well paced than the original RE.
Oh, it is, yeah, absolutely. Like, the island used to be the worst part of that game.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It used to be a bit of a slog. It kind of turned into Resi 5, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it veered into that action a bit too much. But by taking some things out and incorporating some of those into separate ways, which was a really cool idea, they very much kind of turned that into one of the best parts of the game, because the new combat mechanics and the new gunplay and the way Leon moves and the fact that you've got more upgrades at that point in the game, it kind of comes together in the final act as opposed to falling apart. And I think that's like quite an achievement. Like, if anything, I think the castle might be the weakest part of the game this time around.
That's interesting, because so when we talked about all the games that we've talked about so far, it was pretty easy for me to bring up parts of those games that sucked. You know, like
the entire third act with Spider-Man.
Like the Spider-Man has narrative issues. I totally agree that it kind of starts to fall apart. Baldur's Gate has long stretches that are kind of miserable, in my opinion.
Oh, I just finished Act 1 of the Shadow Curse lands, I was there for too long. It's like really miserable for about 50 hours.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
a lot of people say that.
I want to get out of here. But now I am. I'm like, woo, I can finally get to the city that's in the name after 40 hours.
Yeah, and we haven't done Zelda yet, but I think a lot of the grind for battery segments in the underworld
100%
blows.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, not to keep digging, but like there's parts about Mario I didn't like. I'm having a hard time thinking of any part of Resident Evil 4 that isn't great.
There's only one section in the castle where you need to defend Ashley as she's cranking those things to get that bridge up. That's probably the only part in Resi where I'm like,
but man,
otherwise,
that was really hard.
Right? I did that on professional, and that kicked my ass. I had like 5 bullets. But you're right.
Yeah.
It's consistently fantastic in a way where few games are. Even Alan Wake, it's like, I have to do a lot of walking around and back and forth. But the highs are high. But I think the highs in Resident Evil 4 are so consistent that there's no lows.
Yeah. I do feel pretty similar about Alan Wake. The thing that the part of that game that sucks is the bugs.
Yeah,
the
and
actual
they'll
game
fix
is
those.
Yeah. So
I was very lucky with Alan Wake. I got a few bugs. I don't know why.
Let's talk about those two specifically, though, because they are so similar, and because Alan Wake is so heavily influenced by Resident Evil 4 specifically, right? Like, why Resident Evil over Alan Wake, do you think?
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't want to say nostalgia or gunplay, but those are two big prevailing reasons. And I think it comes to the sort of horror you love, because I haven't seen Twin Peaks. Right, I'll say that up front.
Oh no.
Like Alan Wake 2 hinges on a lot of that like supernatural surrealism, and I think it does horror incredibly well, but I don't know, there's just something about like the gothic, cheesy campiness, B-movie-esque qualities of Resident Evil 4 that does it more for me in terms of like a horror framework or a shooter framework. And that series, like, I want to see where this story goes, but not because it's intriguing or because it's going to outsmart me or subvert expectations. It's just very silly and warm and familiar, but also scary, incredibly violent and ridiculous. And I saw a good point raised, where it feels like Alan Wake 2 is the Resident Evil 4 of its generation. But we also have Resident Evil 4 is the Resident Evil 4 of this generation, because it's been remade. So I'm like... You're putting two titans against one another in a way where they're both masterpieces of horror design and character.
Yeah.
But I think for me, Resident Evil 4 trumps up just like when I look back on it and all of the things I love about it. Oh, it's tough though. Both of those games are amazing, but I'm here to defend Resi. So
yeah, right. Well, here a point in Resi's favor. We should talk a little bit about Separate Ways too, because we got another Resident Evil 4 game. Now, most people consider those, part of the same game because of the GameCube re-release. They came together, but we didn't have to wait long for Separate Ways. And
really,
it really turns that little DLC chapter, like, completely flips it from the original.
Yeah, it totally does, because when I was playing through Resident Evil 4, I thought, oh, it's a shame that they cut these bits. Or they reinvented something, but also took something out as a consequence. But when going into Separate Ways, they introduce all of those old boss battles and all of those old segments in interesting ways, while also expanding on Ada's character arc, even if the voice acting for Ada is not good.
Yeah,
it's to the point where I was laughing at it, which feels mean, but the delivery is just incredibly flat. But despite that, I think they still do some interesting stuff with Ada's character and Wesker and Lewis, and they did far more than they needed to, because when you think about what Separate Ways used to be, it had some cutscenes and it had some stuff, but it was kind of just filling in those gaps of how Ada showed up where Leon was at times. But this does so much more. Like, you'll find new notes, you'll find new like weapons and upgrades that are completely unique to Ada. And I think the fact that it ties that narrative in and makes me more excited for what Resi's going to do next is quite an accomplishment. It could have just been lazy level-based horde stuff, but They clearly thought about how to incorporate this from the beginning, and I think because of that, it's much, much stronger.
Yeah, it changes the trajectory of the story. It has different levels. It has
does.
different bosses. Like that's
The laser corridor. They finally did that. I was
yeah.
so
Oh
happy.
yeah. And it makes the story more cohesive. It gives the characters more motivation. The new separate ways really elevates the remake. Not that it needed it, but I think
Mercenaries! Oh my god, Mercenaries!
Oh yeah,
great
Mercenaries. Mercenaries can be in its own award category.
Yeah.
Oh boy, what a game! I'm talking
Resi
myself
4
into
is
it.
just, yeah, see, you're like, yeah, you're right. Resident Evil 4 is incredible.
You're right.
I want to finish recording this and go play it. You're like,
I know. It's like
you've changed my mind.
I think no one really realistically thinks it will win just because one, Baldur's Gate is more recent and so incredibly popular, and two, because of all of Zelda's incredible innovations, right? I think that most people would consider those the front runners. And all the games on this list are fantastic, and that's why we did the series, because they all deserve to win. But boy, I sure love Resident Evil 4, man.
I know,
Woo,
right?
what a game.
It's just, it just gets you fired up, you know?
Yeah.
Like, in a way that few games do. Oh, and the stuff you can unlock, like the concept art and all of that stuff, that's amazing. The shooting gallery. Oh, the fact that I just keep thinking of stuff that this game does, it kicks ass. It's like, yeah, Resident Evil 4.
Yeah. All right. Well argued. I was pretty easily swayed. Is there any last things you want to say about Resi?
Oh, it's real good. Leon's a very good himbo twig. I'll say that.
Yeah.
That should be an award category because he'd win it. There's a lot of competition this year, surprisingly.
Cool. We'll be back with one more.
He's the last one.
Tears of the Kingdom. Andrew King.
Banger.
Andrew Kingdom. Thank you so much for watching. You can read Jade's more comprehensive argument linked down in the description. There. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell, and visit us at TheGamer.com. That's TheGamer. No space.
No.